double check that this is counting down. Okay, apparently there was no countdown. This is new. We haven't live streamed before. Everybody on YouTube, hi, welcome to our program on conversations with HBO. Okay, apparently there was no countdown. This is and more technical difficulties. It's new. So my name is Chris Van Wickler. I'm the Emerging Technologies Librarian at Great Neck Library, which is up on the North Shore. I run our high-end technology room, which is our STEM lab, and it's actually open to all of Nassau County residents. So hopefully we have some people from different counties. Feel free to, give a shout out in the chat if you want on YouTube as you're watching us. But you can always come to Great Neck Library if you want. We have our STEM lab. You can make an appointment or just come on in when we're open. We have 3D printers, laser engravers, virtual reality, augmented reality, lots of gaming computers, as well as other software for filmmaking. We just got a 3D scanner thanks to a grant from Lilrick. And talking about Lilrick, I want to thank them from the bottom of our hearts at Great Neck Library for supporting this event and helping to get everything started and set up with HBO. So without any further ado or advertisement, I'd like to introduce our panelists from HBO here. We have Vanya Cernule. Hopefully I said the last name right. I've been messing it up so far. And then Vanya Cernule is Director of Photography. And we have Claire Shenli, who is a post-production. It's just post-production, right, Claire?
I'm the post-producer.
So. Post-producer, I had it wrong. Sorry about that.
No worries.
So thank you both for joining us. Thank you, HBO, for sponsoring this event and getting everything set up. And without any further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Vanya, who wanted to talk to us about his role as Director of Photography.
Yes, thank you. I'm glad to be here. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about my journey of becoming a Director of Photography, which between the point when I decided that that's what I wanted to do and the point when I was able to support myself and my family in New York City, it took something like 15 years, which is I didn't come up through the ranks like traditional way of becoming a DP is you start as a camera trainee, then you move on and you become a assistant camera person, and then you move on and become an operator, and then eventually you become a Director of Photography. I didn't really do anything other than being a Director of Photography, which is maybe why it took me 15 years. Maybe it would take, if I took a different path, it would be faster. But I knew in film school in Zagreb that I was I'm really not a focus puller material. I only was a focus puller on one student project long time ago in Zagreb, Croatia, where I'm from. And I decided that that's not something I'm able to do. So so I decided to try to skip that whole path. It all started with me falling in love with still photography. I wanted to become a still photographer when I was very young. This was elementary school, something like 7th grade, and I got a camera and I started making my own pictures, and I was very passionate about photography, and very early I decided that I'm going to do something in my life that has to do with photography. So a couple of years have passed. I was had a couple of my photos published from like rock concerts, and I loved the lifestyle. I loved everything about it. But when I finished high school, I really had to get into the university in my hometown, in Zagreb, Croatia. And there was no school for still photography in Zagreb. And but I needed to get into university this way or the other because serving the army was mandatory. And if you got into the university, you served for 12 months rather than 18 months. So I was like, I have to get into the university. So I went through all the schools and I found that there's a film academy, that there's this department called cinematography department, which I had really didn't know anything about cinematography. But I thought this is maybe the closest thing to photography what I love to do. And I applied at film school for cinematography department. Somehow miraculously I got in after a couple of attempts. And it was really in film school that I realized that everything I loved about still photography was still there in cinematography, but there was also so much more, and also working with people and collaborations and being a part of the big group of creative collaborators. I thought was something that I really wanted to spend my life doing. So it was really an accident for me to end up in film school and then discovering that this is what I really want to do. Unfortunately, when I graduated from film school, my country, which was then Yugoslavia, collapsed literally as I was graduating. So, and of course, the film industry, along with everything else, completely collapsed. And really, there was really a film industry there. There was a domestic film industry, but also a lot of American post-production, co-productions were there, and everything disappeared overnight. So I had to make a decision whether I'm going to look for something else to do or go somewhere else. I had a brief career as a news cameraman because that was the only thing with the camera that I was able to do at the time, and also kept me out of everything. But still, I was present and I was part of the. I was. It was hard as everything the whole collapse and the war, civil war that was happening. It was hard to watch it on TV. But I didn't want to be part of it. So being a news cameraman was really about the best solution for me. But it was really brief. I was really, when as a young person, when you realize how the sausage is made, how the TV news are actually made, and how market-driven it was, and how it was. This was in 1991 when the whole TV news is entertainment that we have today just started, and I became very very cynical about it and really hated how it all works. And I decided that I have to move on. So I had this idea about New York being as being, this was also something that was, the whole conflict there was a product of, nationalistic feelings were driving everything. And so I had this very naive idea as a kid that in New York, it doesn't matter who's from anywhere. This is just a mix of everybody. And it's the nationalism is something that's as far away as you can go from European style nationalism. So I've never been in New York, so this is just something I thought was true. And also there was a great film school in New York, which I thought would be for me the fastest route to meet people, and because I didn't know anybody here. So I applied for Tisch School of the Arts at New York University, and miraculously again I got in. It was a very competitive program at that time, but also had some experience. I already finished one film school, and I was working a little bit, and so I got in the School of the Arts graduate film program, which did for me exactly what I wanted it to do. I met a lot of great people, a generation of very talented directors. And I was fortunate because at NYU, everybody wanted to produce and direct. And I was the only one, not the only one, but there were just only a couple of us that wanted to shoot. That it wasn't just a thing we were interested in. There was like 2 or 3 of us that that knew that this is what we wanted to do. So I got to pick projects from most talented students from my generation because I was committed to cinematography, which was a great position for me. So that was really a great situation. I shot something like 20 student films over a period of 2 years. Some of them got into festivals like Sundance and competition in other festivals, and so that was so. The film school really did do for me exactly what I wanted it to do. After I finished film school, some of the I had to wait like a year or two before the people I met at film school would start making their first features. So I had a show reel that I put together, and I sent it to every agent that I knew of, and nobody, of course, wrote back. But there was only one agency that wrote back, and I went and I met them, and they wanted to start working with me, and I started shooting small, independent, low budget features in New York, right out of film school. And things were going really well on paper. On resume, it looked like everything was going really well, because every now and then one of these features would get into a festival. I was getting exposure, reviews in Variety, Hollywood Reporter, just everything looked amazing. But I really couldn't support myself in New York. It was a struggle. So I didn't really know how much longer I will be able to be in New York and keep doing this kind of work, because it was really impossible to support myself. And it was probably 2005 when I got an invitation to interview for a TV pilot in New York. This was the first time I got such interview, and I didn't really know anything about how TV business works, and I was a little bit, this is not really what I wanted to do, but I was completely desperate, and I went to this interview with the director Richard Shepard, who also had a New York, also came from New York independent film, and this was one of his first pilots, and he wanted to hire somebody who was not one of the people who were shooting all the pilots in New York. So that's how I got the interview in the first place, because he was going through the list. I don't even know how he found my name. So he looked at my reel, and I was also lucky. I had 2 films in competition in Sundance that year, like 2 little tiny films, but they both made it to competition in Sundance. So Richard decided that he wants to hire me for this pilot. It was one of the big pilots in New York that year, Ugly Betty, for the TV series Ugly Betty. And people from the studio told him that he must have lost his mind to hire this kid who has only this really dark, silhouettes on his reel and everything. So they thought he was crazy to want to hire somebody they never heard of, whose all material is so dark. And this was supposed to be like a bright, glossy comedy, but he insisted that I'm the person he wants to work with. which is amazing. To this day, whenever I have any, if I'm given any award and anything, I mention him in every speech because he completely turned my career around. And which was also enormous risk for him. I didn't know anybody that was working on that level, even to hire a gaffer or other collaborators. I had no idea who these people were. So the studio made sure that they surround me with the top New York professionals, just in case something goes wrong. So I was working with the best gaffer in town, which is it's amazing, totally incredible crew. One of the things, because I didn't know how TV pilots are made or anything, I just lit it, the way I would like a feature, and that was my only real standard, and which I didn't even know there was a different way of doing things in TV, and so the pilot looked really good, and everybody was really happy, and it was also a very successful series, and I remember just before I got hired on that, I went to my then agent and I told her, things are not going well. Maybe I should try to do something else. Maybe I should try a comedy. And she said, look at you, really, you'll never get a comedy in a million years. Like, just forget a comedy. That's not for you. You'll never get a comedy. So, but now I had a successful comedy pilot, and all of a sudden I was getting calls for every comedy pilot that was in. I became like a comedy guy, overnight, which is really again not something I was planning on, and so the next thing that happened, I got a call to do to shoot the first season of 30 Rock. Which I of course accepted, and that was a really great experience. It was the first time I was working on the stage. I was learning. First time I was working with multiple cameras. It was a great learning experience, and also a great environment. It was like great people, and it was really fun to be part of that show. But after I finished season 1 on 30 Rock, shows like that can become a little bit, once you figure out the lighting and everything for a show like that, it starts kind of moving by itself, So I felt one morning, like, if I don't show up to work today, they'll be fine, they'll know what to do. So I said, maybe I should try to move on, and so I left 30 Rock, and I also now I had this great problem, which was, how do I get out of half-hour comedy and into features and different kinds of material. But again, it was a great problem to have, because I was already working and things were going well. So that actually took me another 5 years, and I think it was the show Marco Polo for Netflix, which changed that path for me, and I was getting more into the kind of dramatic material that I was really interested in, and things have been going well since then. I don't know, has 15 minutes passed?
No, that's awesome. That was
so
perfect.
This is how I became. This was my journey to get to where I am today. If sometimes, when I do seminars and I'm a guest lecturer, people ask me which path I would recommend: going through the ranks, or trying to go straight to DPing, and there's really no answer to that. It's just something that individually everybody has to figure out for themselves. But it's a long process in both, no matter which path you take. So this is what I like to tell students: is just be prepared, and it's going to eventually, you'll get there, but it's gonna take a while.
That's awesome. Yeah, life always takes a little longer than you anticipate, especially when you're younger. you're ready to right off the bat. You're gonna be. It's always work. You don't. You're a little older. You asked me 10 years ago if I thought I'd be a librarian. I would not have said that's where I'll be. Lo and behold, I am. So thank you, Vanya. And now we have Claire Shanley.
Yep.
And she works for post-production.
I do.
And, we're going to hear her story, and then afterwards we'll take questions. So I do want to point out to our YouTube followers there, if you want to subscribe to Great Neck Library, give a like, thumbs up, you can as well. We appreciate it. But most importantly, if you have questions for our panelists about how they got into the career or how you might get in the career of TV production, please post them in the YouTube chat or email us at STEMlab at Great Neck Library. I've got librarians watching all places. So Claire, this is it's all your story now.
It's all me. Cool. Thanks, Chris, and thanks for having us. Vanya, I loved hearing your backstory. I feel like I knew parts of it. Now I know kind of more of the full picture. I think I'm going to do something a little bit in reverse, because I feel like a lot of people know what a cinematographer, a DP is, but a lot of people are like, you're a producer, but then you say post in front of your name, and what does that mean? So I'm going to start with like what I do right now, which is I am the post producer. That's my role on the show. When you see my credit on a show, it's producer. When we talk within the show, we call my role post producer, because I am the producer who's in charge of every aspect of post production and delivering the show in the end. So what the heck does that mean? Literally, post production is everything that happens to the footage from the minute it leaves set after it's shot all the way until it goes to the studio as a finished show. So in the case of the show that Vanya and I are on our way to working on right now for HBO, that's The Gilded Age. So that includes all of these different aspects. There are a lot of things that happen. You know, Vanya and his team shoot beautiful footage. The production sound team records pristine sound. You know, there's all this amazing work that's been happening in the lead up, the costumes, the hair, the makeup, the casting, the talent, all of that. And then it's all manifested into these files, right? These things that are shot, they get sent to post. We make a TV show. It's kind of magic. Post is responsible for a lot of things. So I always like to do a little bit of a PR thing for post-production, because people think, oh, I know, you take it and you edit it and then the show is done and we watch it. And that's like, you know, I don't know, a few weeks, something, right? Whatever. So, you know, I always like to say we work in the dream factory. You know, all of us do that work in production and post, but the factory works very hard to make those dreams feel very real. It takes time. And also for viewers, you know, we want viewers to focus on the story and enjoy it as a viewer. We want it to feel right. And so it's often said that when a lot of post-production, a lot of post is done well, as a viewer, you don't notice it at all. There's not a moment where you're like, oh, that really sounded like a punch. That was great. Or like, oh, that was an interesting edit. I now know that this character isn't totally reliable. Or, you know, oh, the color timing here really gives me a sense of foreboding, right? There's a lot of, it works on other levels of perception. So you're watching the show and you're allowed to just sort of enjoy and let the show experience the show as a show, not to kind of break it down in its component elements. So it's a lot of stuff about cognition and how you perceive things. So yes, post absolutely includes editing, you know, all of the editing work, selecting takes, performances, shaping the story by what you see and what you don't see, and when you see it, and what you hear and what you don't hear, and when you hear it. It also includes a bunch of other aspects that kind of feed that whole experience. So we, you know, we usually divide those up into the loose categories of picture and sound, just because we have to divide and conquer. Picture being what you see, of course, and sound being what you hear. So I'll take a minute to just talk about some of the things that in this whole process, what happens, because my job as the post producer is that I oversee all of this. It's sort of I'm I don't know, the conductor of an amazing orchestra. The people have all these different skills that they bring to the work. And then it's also about how to deploy people and get the best work done, and also to fit the vision of the showrunners, the writers, to honor the intention and the vision of the DP in the work, and to make sure all of that work comes together in this really amazing experience of a show. So just to say a little bit more about those parts of the work. In sound, we do both sound editing, we do additional sound recording, we do additional dialogue recording besides what's shot on set. Sometimes we're just doing things like cleaning it up. A plane flew overhead while somebody was saying a line. We've got to take that out. Sometimes we're filling a room with sound. You're in a restaurant and you want it to sound like there are actually people having conversations in all the other areas of the restaurant. Adding more voices, enriching an environment, adding a TV announcer in a background or a radio broadcast to give texture to a space, to explain to somebody, to kind of give you an explanation of where you are. All of those kind of recordings. Sometimes there will be dialogue that's added after the fact to sort of help explain what's going on. Something seemed like it really made sense when it was shot, but we need a little bit more guidance. And then it becomes very clear. We do a lot of sound effects work in post. So that can be everything from, the heels of walking down, heel hits of somebody walking down a hall, to what I mentioned before, the sound of a punch landing. Like, what does that really sound like? To a show I just worked on was set in 1940, and you're walking into an office and there are a bunch of people typing on typewriters. So making sure that we had a full populated sound of typewriters. Effects are like the texture that gives you a feel for both a space, a place, and a time. Once everything is cut and recorded and put together, then we do a sound mix, which is giving everything the right balance. So you're hearing things as if you were in the room, or as you move through a space, you may hear something, it may come into your field of hearing. So there's a kind of science to that, and about how you kind of space out what you hear when you hear it. So that it's, oh, I'm on the street in 1882, I'm going to hear some horse hoofs, or, there's all these different environments that we are creating, and the mix is kind of the bow on it all. One of the components that also goes into the mix is our music, right? Music is a huge part of our story. You can do so much with music. Often we'll have a composer on a show who's actually writing themes and composing pieces of music specific to different characters or environments. Other showrunners, producers really want to work with music that's already out there in the world. So we may be working with a music supervisor who licenses music, or we may actually record new versions of music of an existing song, having somebody re-record that song. We also have music for our title sequence for the show. That's kind of like the opener of the show to set the mood for the show. And all of those music elements fall under post, which is super fun. So that's kind of the umbrella of all of the sound components that we work with in post. And then in terms of picture, obviously, when people think of editing, they think of picture editing, right? You're on an Avid, you're using Premiere, if you're an editor, selecting takes, looking at different performances, figuring out how to shape the story by what's seen. Elements of timing, we have different types of editorial styles for a comedy versus a drama, and whose point of view is being told, whose point of view is being focused on in a certain scene. I always mention, it's both what you see and what you don't see in all of these environments. Another big and increasingly important part of our picture elements is visual effects. How do we create a world? How do we transport you so that you buy into the story entirely? How do we make a street in New York City in 2020 look like it might have in 1984? How do we direct your eye to a certain area of the frame? How do we get you to focus on things? How do we clean up mistakes? That's part of the VFX work too. Sometimes it's, we can't avoid that sometimes a shiny glass door is going to reflect the camera operator as it falls shut, but we still have to clean that up and get it out of there. Other times it's the more, you construct an entire world. How do we age a character to tell a story? How do we create a place that doesn't really exist in the world, right? How do we make big buildings with LEDs on them that change every minute? There's a lot of different challenges, and in some ways what's exciting is the sky is the limit with VFX, but it's also, we have a budget. We're always trying to work with that. And then a few other pieces of picture that we think about. Picture finishing. This is where Vanya and I end up kind of joining forces and making sure we're honoring the intended look of the show. So we have kind of two critical steps with picture. Once we've finished an episode, once we're done editing, we call it, we have locked picture and we're in the home stretch with it. And we combine all the highest resolution versions of the show. And then we are doing what we call an online edit, which is marrying everything together. And then we do color timing, which is where we are adjusting and finessing the color tonality to make sure that we're in line with the intended look of how Vanya was lighting, what we were going for in terms of overtones, undertones, how people are looking, what does skin tone look like relative to costume, all of these different considerations. So those are kind of our broad strokes of picture. There are a couple other really fun parts of picture. The things you may not ever think about, but are always going on, like additional footage. Vanya and I have both worked with the showrunner who loves to have, there's a TV on in the background and it's showing a show that actually would have aired in the season that we're depicting on TV, right? That TV show has to come from somewhere. We have to research that. Sometimes we call that archival footage or stock footage. Generally speaking, that's additional footage that someone else shot that might be used within the show. Sometimes that's a simpler thing. If you don't want to fly a whole crew to Las Vegas to do an establishing shot of the Las Vegas Strip, maybe someone has shot something that would look, that is of the format that you want, and you're going to incorporate that in. I've done lots of like movie within a movie kind of stuff, or we're in a theater watching something on a screen, all of those, that's additional footage. And we get to choose that and collaborate with the producers on selecting that stuff. And then I mentioned the title sequence of the show is something that we work very hard on in post. It's the opening sequence that gives you the show title and often some of the lead credits of the show. And it's a really important way to give viewers a sense of what's ahead. What are we doing in this show? It's our calling card in a way. So everything is very thought out in that process, from the order of the cuts to what you're seeing, to the design, the font, the placement in the frame. And, the question of what you hear, music, singing, do you want a new version of an old song, all of those kind of things. So there's a design process, an editing process, a music process, a visual effects process, just within the main title also. And last but really, really not least is the end credits of the show. So Post is responsible for making sure that everybody who works on the show is recognized, which seems really mundane, but you want people's work to be honored and respected, and you want their name, you work hard on a show, you don't want your name misspelled on it. So that's our responsibility too. So this kind of comes to the point of what I like about this work is that it's details and it's big picture. It's creative and it's very technical. And at the same time, it's a lot of teamwork and bringing people together across areas. But I also get to kind of go off on my own sometimes and work too. So that's a post-producer's role. That's sort of the sketch of it. I'm responsible for sending the finished show to the studio. So that's all the quality control, making sure the studio gets all the elements that they need. That's everything from backups to files and paperwork and all that. And I sort of alluded to this before, but it's, all of it is about getting it done on a very particular schedule and on a budget. So that's my world. And to shift gears a little bit and just give some background about how I got involved in this work, you know, I think what's different between Vanya's story and my story is there isn't really an established, like, you do this, then you do this, then you do this to become a post producer. And I think at one point I was like, I'm going to be an editor. But, you know, one thing in terms of a starting place that we share is I love photography. And for a long time, I thought I would either be a photographer or a chemist, because I did analog darkroom photography, which I loved, and I ran a darkroom and I mixed my own chemistry, and I was going to go and work for Kodak and make film emulsion, which, you know, I still use a lot of what I learned about color science in my job every day. But I also majored in political philosophy in college, so I did not end up studying chemistry. And when I graduated from college here in New York, I worked in HIV and AIDS prevention education work, because it was really at a time when the AIDS epidemic was really affecting people in the early 90s. And that work, I loved working with teenagers because they keep you honest. They don't take any BS. And I also loved it because I was making media. I was making, you know, videos and ads, and I was doing that. And I did not have that sort of undergraduate film education, but I had learned how to edit through the amazing organization in New York City called, there are two organizations where I learned to edit. One was Downtown Community Television, which is dctvny.org. They are still in effect. I love DCTV. They're an incredible community-based organization. And also Film and Video Arts, which is sadly no longer around, but that's where I shot a lot of film. And I did a summer film program at NYU at Vanya's alma mater. So I learned those technical aspects of film and video because I loved knowing how things worked. And the form of editing was very appealing to me because of structure. And you know, how a story unfolded, the act of constructing the story, the intersection of the technical and the creative. I did a lot of work on documentary, and sort of, you know, in documentary, it's a lot about constructing the story in the edit, which informed my understanding of editing's relationship to the story as well. So after I worked, probably it was like 4 years after I graduated from college, then I did end up going to graduate school for film and television and got an MFA. And I became an assistant editor and then an editor. And I was also doing a lot of technical editing. So like linear online editing, which is the old school. You look like you're at the command deck of the Starship Enterprise, lots of buttons, you know, because you're controlling 4 decks. It was when we were still working from tape. I'm totally aging myself, but you get the idea. So it was an amazing experience for me though, and I loved it because it was also about being able to master systems and patching, and just, you know, there was so much technology, and the tape formats were changing every 18 months to 2 years at that point. So it was like you just kind of rolled with it all the time. Then when faster and more powerful computers made editing on computers better, I was like the first person. I was super excited about that. And I learned the Avid Media Composer software and started cutting on it. And that became kind of, there were, you know, it was like where the business was headed, but there weren't a lot of Avids out in the world. So there was kind of a niche market for a while doing that work. Then a funny thing happened, and I was hired out of an edit room by the company that made by Avid, the company that makes the Avid software, because they were building so many edit systems that they needed people who understood the software to do field technician work. And at the time, that was a decision I made with a lot of ambivalence, because I was very much about like, I'm an editor, I'm not a technician. But I also, you know, there's a theme here, and Vanya, you mentioned this, like we are freelancers, and as an editor, as a DP, you know, you're trying to stay ahead of the game constantly. There's a real hustle to it where you're like, what's the next job? Okay, great. I've got this booking for 2 weeks. What comes after that? What comes after that? So Avid offered a different universe of employment to me. And I was like, I'm going to try it. I don't have to stay with it. That's the other thing. It's like freelancing gives you that sense of flexibility where you're like, what's the worst that could happen? I'll go back to freelancing. So I gave it a try, and I actually really loved the technical support work. It was sort of like being an ER doctor for post-production. Like I had to have a lot of knowledge at my fingertips, but also make very quick determinations about where to focus efforts and how to save time and fix problems efficiently. I met all kinds of people working on all kinds of projects, which was great because it was really about like, you know, the scrappiest documentary to the biggest fancy feature film cutting out in a house in Greenwich, Connecticut, and, you know, like, and everything in between. And, you know, I learned to work in teams with people and manage people, which was great. And then, you know, I was walking in and out of a lot of facilities, and I ended up getting hired as a technical director at a facility. And so I learned to manage bigger teams. And then I moved to a place where there were facilities in LA and New York. And then I worked for a company called Broadway Video, which is the company that Lorne Michaels, who founded Saturday Night Live, this was his company. So it was big. It was a company where I got to deal with visual effects and graphics and sound and digital media. And I think that's really where I fell in love with the possibilities of VFX. And I oversaw the entire IT department there. So that was like the moment where it's like, everything's going to be on a computer. Just, you know, it was already clearly happening, but it takes a while for companies to change the way they do things. So basically that's kind of the arc of things. I, you know, continued to work in other facilities after Broadway Video. But then what happened is I was working on I think two things were happening. One is I had been working on a lot of feature films, and then I was working in facilities that were doing both TV and film. And that was also happening culturally, where people were starting to, it was the golden age of television. That first, you know, it's like, oh, The Sopranos, The Wire, we talk about TV like it's art, it's interesting now. And I think that helped. I was a bit of a snob, I'll say, and I was like, I'm film and I'm classy and I'm interested in all these things and I read books, you know. But the idea being that you actually TV, there's a lot of amazing stuff happening in TV, and that arc was happening. And a lot of my clients were changing, and I was asked to go, as we call it, going show side. So that's when I became a post producer. It was after kind of racking up all this different technical experience and overseeing all of these different elements of things, both in picture and sound and visual effects and everything, which kind of brings us to right here. So here we are.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you, Claire.
Sure.
So actually, you bring up a great point. Film and TV, there's so much technology, new technologies coming out, VR, the AR fields, just camera technologies in general. I've watched a few videos from YouTube featuring Vanya talking about different technologies. I can't remember the camera, but there's that like lower light camera that you can look. So I'm really curious, you know, what type of technological breakthroughs are you guys looking at or excited about coming up, or thinking is going to change your field in the next few years, next few months, decade? Is there anything that you guys have thoughts on there, or how that affects your field, the constant changes?
Yes. Do you want to go first, Vanya? I feel like more happens in camera, like more quickly than in post.
Yes, I must admit, it's really how, it's a couple of steps. It's really how the technology changes the workflow that affects me. You know, for example, the difference between TV and feature work for me was always not really so much about the technology that the work is presented on. It was more about how the workflow was designed and how much time I have with the director, for example. You know, and that really was initially the main difference for me of working in feature and TV, is that you know, in feature film you get the pre-production with director. There's one director. You get a pre-production with the director, and then you go and make a film. And it's really this period of pre-production with the director, where as a DP you can contribute a lot, because it's not, you know, once you're on the set, basically you're just reacting to all the disasters that are happening every 15 minutes. But in pre-production, you know, you can have visual ideas that the director might find useful, and that maybe sometimes there's a visual idea that people change the script around. You know, so it's really this part of the process where you get to be, for me at least, that I really enjoy. In TV, initially, in the 10 years ago, 15 years ago, it was you don't get that time with the director. The director, you know, sometimes I would meet the director on the set the first day we started working together, or I would have a phone call or something like that. And it's really, you are just there trying to survive the day, but that has changed since, with evolution of television and TV shows and everything. It has changed, and now on the current project that Claire and I are working together, I got really that same amount, the same process that I would have on a great feature film. It's not even like I even get more time with the director in the prep than I would get on like a small feature. So because I guess everybody realized that, you know, there are certain advantages to have people involved in this part of creating a TV show or a feature. So I don't know if that answers the question. It was more the how the industry is developing that's affecting my work than the technology. I am looking forward to some technologies, but it's really not the camera. You know, I love when the new camera comes out that helps me do what I want to do, rather than all the possibilities the camera might bring. I must say, from all the technology that I'm working with, camera is the least interesting one. It's just really, you know, ideally it just records what you built in front of it, rather than doing things with the camera. So I came up shooting film, where you make all your decisions as you're shooting, and I still believe that's how cinematographers should approach the, you know, of course, taking into account all the amazing things you can do later. But I think if you don't bring anything to that point later, any ideas or anything, then you're lost in time and space afterwards. But as I said, there's some technologies that I'm really excited about, like HDR, when it becomes a standard and everybody has HDR TVs, and I have HDR monitor on the set. I think it's going to help me tremendously, and so that's something I'm really looking forward to.
Yeah, I feel like we're definitely in the awkward adolescent moment of HDR right now, where we, well, this will be the first show, I think, for both of us that we're delivering standard dynamic range and high dynamic range at the same time, because they are hoping that we will be able to actually air the HDR, and then they'll send out a parallel stream of the standard dynamic range. So that basically is like, how much color information are we giving you, right? How much detail in the shadow, how much definition in the brights, and also that you've got, I'm making the shape of the Rec 2020 diagram, you know, with my hands, but it's like, you know, more information about the color space. So that definitely, it's a huge thing. I mean, it's also, you know, I think on the post side of things, we're always like, how do we navigate the bandwidth limitations, right? Because everything we're trying to do, especially in finishing, the files are huge. You know, we're trying to process them as quickly as we can. So when GPU technology really took off for post, you know, it's like when our finishing vendor could populate an entire rack with GPUs to just basically like render, you know, it made a huge difference for us because you can review things in real time. Whereas before it would be like, all right, let's set the looks, and then you come back later, later. So there's more immediacy. I do think, for us on the post side, we've always got this ambivalence about like, it's great, there's a new technology. And then we're like, don't, a little knowledge is a dangerous thing because people are like, well, we can fix that in post. That's not going to be such a bad thing. It's like, I mean, Vanya has seen me in meetings where it's like, oh, we'll just fix that in post, or especially now with like COVID, the conversations about how production is going to change. And it's like, oh, we're going to have to do more VFX. And we're all like, okay, because it's nice that people have so much faith in our technology, but sometimes it's a little bit, you have to kind of bring people back down to earth and to say, yes, technology is amazing. Technology is your friend. Technology is not, a million things that can get done just because we thought of it either. So there's always that line that we walk,
It's so true.
Mm-hmm.
So we've got some questions from our live stream here. This one seems to be directed at more Vanya, but I think anyone can take it. It's from Adam, and he says that he is a TV, radio, film major at Syracuse University, focusing on comedy. And he was wondering if you could discuss how filming TV comedies influenced your cinematography choices compared to drama. Like how, when it's a comedy, how do you choose, film? If there's any like camera shots or adjustments that you're doing for a comedy rather than a drama.
At the time when I was involved with comedies a lot, I always believed that the best comedies we've seen were shot like dramas. It's really, you can't, there's no funny way of photographing things. You can't help the material in that way. It's more about the rhythm, and sometimes that rhythm is done with the camera, or helped or dictated by the camera work. But aesthetically, I don't believe that you should really shoot something like a comedy or shoot something like a drama. I did a comedy feature recently, Crazy Rich Asians, and I had this exact conversation with the director, and we decided we are going to shoot this the way the whatever the locations are telling us, and how, whatever atmosphere we want to achieve. There is one thing though that's in the back of my mind whenever I'm shooting something that a comedy is, I pay more attention in lighting faces. Not necessarily, that doesn't necessarily mean that everything has to be bright or low contrast, but it's something that I pay a little bit more attention to, and trying not to sacrifice the general atmosphere of the scene by just lighting the faces. But if you look at Some Like It Hot or whatever classic comedy you can think of, I don't know if they're shot like comedies. So that's how I feel about it.
Yeah, that's awesome. So we're gonna try to get to a few questions before we run out of time, because I know you guys always have a busy schedule. I guess unless you're not working on a film, I would imagine you've always got a busy time. So
I hope it was a little bit busier, but.
Yeah, it's gotta be a crazy time right now with the pandemic wrapping up and hopefully wrapping up, but getting semblance of normal.
Let's mask it up and wrap it up, right? That pandemic. Yes. Sorry. Go ahead, Chris.
No, that's perfect. You guys are working on The Gilded Age, and certainly that's a period film. So. What is it like, both post-production and shooting a period piece? What's really tricky, or that like piece that you're trying to like fit in? How much does the historical moment or time period that it's set in play a role in your decisions when you're making a period piece?
I feel like it's very, I've also been working on period pieces now for, I just feel like I'm going back in time, because I did The Deuce season 2 and 3. Vanya did season 1 actually, so we were in parallel universes with that. And then having just completed some limited series set in 1940 with The Plot Against America. So, there's a lot of practical considerations about, you look at everything around you with a different eye in terms of what's non-period, and what. And also, depending on the show, it's a little different to do something that's, in the late 70s or the 80s versus 1940, right? And coming up with a sort of, with the production as part of our prep, we've come up with some rule books, I think, or guidelines about like what we do and what we don't do for those kind of shows. But it just, there's a lot of visual effects, and in some ways going as far back in time as we are on the Gilded Age, I think is it makes everybody more conscious of it in a way, which is nice. Whereas before, we would have conversations about like curb cuts on the Deuce, and you were like, this is just, or like, is that street sign period or not? I don't know if that, what about that mailbox? Okay, are we covering that mailbox? I mean, it was amazing because production will do incredible things to cover things. Like we had the phone booth and the news, there was like a newsstand that they would use to just cover things on the street when we would do street scenes. So there's all kinds of creativity that happens with that. I think, by virtue of Gilded Age, and I'm interested to hear what you think about this, Vanya, because we've got, the streets were literally made of a different material. Sidewalks were different. There were horse-drawn carriages all over the streets. So it was dirtier. It was different. Like it's a very different kind of feel. You can't walk out onto the street now here in Brooklyn and be like, oh, this could be 1882. There's no way, right? So it does kind of constrain us in a good way, I think. I'm interested if you agree or if you're like,
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I love period shows for, first of all, it just, in preparation to do it, I try to read as much as possible about the period. So you just learn things, not necessarily connected to the work, but in trying to get inspired and look for ideas, just try to find out as much about the period as possible. And for example, on Gilded Age, it was just, I just got so obsessed by certain things that were going on in New York at that time that I just read as much as possible, and I see this whole city in different light now.
Yeah.
I walk around, I was like, oh, this happened because of that, and this was so which is really fascinating period in history of New York and the world. But also, so one thing that I did a show. I mentioned Marco Polo, which was first time I worked on a show where there were multiple DPs, and which I got the call to do it. It was going to be done in Malaysia. I was going to fly to Malaysia and start working with a French DP that I'd never met before, and it just sounded like it could be the worst experience, but I really wanted to do the project. Luckily, he was a great guy, and we became friends, and he was learning from me, I was learning from him. It became like film school all over again, because it's just, as a DP, you never see other DPs working, and this was just a great learning process, just seeing, oh, this is how somebody else does something. So it was really, really great. But amazing sets were built. It was all amazing costumes and everything. But because we had such a different aesthetics, he was like a famous European action guy. Lots of light, hard beams of light. And I developed a very different lighting taste and style. So what were we going to do? We had a couple of weeks to figure it out. What were we going to do so that we can't force ourselves into doing something else. So it would be, you can't really work against yourself. So we decided, let's figure out the color. And this is where the post-producer comes in and helped us tremendously. We decided, okay, it's a 13th century show. there are only a couple of light sources available. There's fire, braziers, candles, all those things. There's daylight, and then there's moonlight. And we said, if we precisely decide what exactly is the color of these three sources, then our work will blend together. So, and we presented this to the producers. They supported us. They gave us 2 days of testing in Paris. We flew to Paris. We did real tests, color tests. We figured out the lookup tables and all the color science, how we are going to make this as consistent, these three colors as consistent as possible. And it worked out great. You know, he was still lighting his way, I was lighting my way, but the color really brought everything together. So that was that was a 13th century show. Then I did The Deuce in New York, which was a cacophony of all colors. You know, it's like in the 70s on 42nd Street. So every color light you can possibly imagine is going to be there. There, because this is really one thing that I can control in a period show is the light source. You know, because it's all about amazing sets, and you don't want to get in the way of our department and production design and their amazing ideas. So I try to work with them. But what I always try to do is being true to the light source that would have been there at the time. So in case of The Deuce, which was 1972 in New York City, I was trying to get the color of the street right, like you know, what was, and we were trying to work with real neon, which was really hard because those, you know, we had, you know, some of those signs you see in season 1 at least are like 40 years old neon signs, which will let you down whatever they decide. And it's also, you can't really control the levels. And then sometimes you're lighting the street according to whatever the light, the neon sign in a window is. So you're sometimes being held hostage by a neon sign in the window. You have to light the whole street up to those levels. But I think trying to stay true to the light sources really worked and contributed to the at least to the authenticity of the show that the creator David Simon was really after. As Claire mentioned before, he was, you know, what is the mailbox like? So that for me, I did a little bit of the same thing with lighting. So I insisted that we turn off the lights, you know, the existing city lights and things like that. So Gilded Age presents the whole new problems with period lighting for me, because we have spectacular costumes, amazing sets, and my dilemma is that I'm not 100% sure I solved it yet, but it's how do I, you know, because lighting back in that period is all gas and some candle and everything, which has a very strong character. So everything is very orange, and a lot of the cooler colors just disappear or start looking a little bit muddy. So how do I stay true to the light source and make it believable without compromising the work of the costume designer and our department and everything by just washing out their work. So I love period shows. If I could pick now, I would just do period shows from forever, from different periods though.
Totally covering different times. Right. Yeah, and I think that's such a great example of how collaborative the work really is, because it's not just about like, you don't make a, you know, unilateral decision about like, I'm doing this, you know, it's like it's always about like, how do I honor and allow everybody's work to shine in this environment through your work too, which is very cool.
Awesome. So I know we're slightly over. Would you guys mind if I ask 2 more questions to you, and then we'll let you head out?
I could do 2 more. Can you do 2 more?
I'm fine.
Okay.
You're fine? Excellent. Thank you. I know that I'm pretty sure that this question comes from one of our kids in one of our animation clubs, and they were asking, have you ever had to incorporate animation into a film or a TV show that you've done? And how difficult is it to do it? And I would open that up maybe more to just visual effects in general, like the thought process behind, like if you were going to have, a dragon flying in, how do you prepare for that type of visual effect, getting that involved?
Well, my little stab, I would say, that's usually a decision that we're making in prep, that we're, figuring out how we would be doing that, because we always want some practical element, I think, if not, if we're creating an environment for an animated thing, or, it's like we have to figure out how that relates to the overall shot, and what it's doing. So, Chris, when you say integrating VFX, I think about some of our like classic CG model situations, right? Where we have a giant green screen and that becomes a building, or, I think a lot of people saw when that movie Life of Pi was out, and that the tiger that was in the boat was actually just like kind of this green pillowy thing that was, comped in later. And so, usually for us, like when we get an animated element, I think it's more often like a 3D kind of texture mapped, fully rendered out, beautiful thing. So, and we usually go through a lot of revisions of them too, because it's one thing about how do you light, how is your element lit that you create versus how is the practical stuff lit? And, where was that an exterior, interior, which I'm sure Vanya has more things to say about that too, as animation and VFX.
No, really, it is the lighting. And for me, the challenge is a lot of times you don't see, a lot of times it's as simple as blending several sources together, like shooting a car scene on the green screen and then lighting the car interior. But a lot of times you don't really know what will be out the window or what the weather is out the window even. In ideal situation, you would know. But then the challenge is how do you then light for something that you haven't seen, which happens often because it's just once you start shooting, different things happen and it can affect schedules, everybody's schedules. I unfortunately haven't done like a big animation film. I would love to do that. I would love to, I would love to have an experience of being a DP on like a Lion King or something like that, where you're lighting virtual environments and virtuals. I would love to do that, just to have an experience. And but I haven't had that experience. And but I've been asking around.
Yeah, that's awesome. The film techniques in Lion King were insane. Some of the things that they did in those documentaries. So I think the last question we want to ask you is probably the most important to some of our viewers. How do you get involved? If you have recommendations for someone who's young, looking to get involved in TV production or just film production on their own, what are your recommendations to someone, even someone who's in high school right now, thinking about like what they should do? Is there festivals they should try to put films in? Where do they start? It's a big question.
It's a big question. I mean, I think some broad advice I would have is learn as much as you can about all the different jobs, because I think sometimes I talk to people and they're like, I want to be an editor. And it's like, what they're picturing the work of an editor is they're picturing somebody who gets to sit in a room by themselves and just make decisions about a movie or a TV show, right? And in reality, that's part of the job for sure. And then the other part of the job, which is actually probably more important in terms of getting the work done, is about discussing with people and negotiating and what about this cut and kind of going back and forth. And then there's also not just the director and producers, there's also a studio person involved. And so it's a lot of actually what you are is a negotiator as well as a creative person who makes all these decisions. So I think it's good. I think people should always really listen to what they like what piques your interest? What are you intrigued by? But don't always say like, oh, then I have to do this thing because that's what I do. Like that's what I want to do. There are actually so many more jobs in production and in post than people really know about. Like I would love for someone to be like, I want to be a locations manager. It's like there are a lot of different jobs that are super important. So I always tell people like, watch the credits, who are these people? Like, what are those job titles? What do they mean? So that you understand a little bit. Cause I think everybody's like, I want to be a writer. I want to be a director. Some people, the weird control freaks like myself want to be editors, but then you learn about all these other things that are around that and also how the work actually gets done. And I would say, I mean, just from my vantage point right now, historically, I think it's been hard, and it's still hard to break into the industry because it's very, it's sort of, what do I want to say? It's elitist in the way that there's an assumption that you're going to be able to scrap around and not make a lot of money for a while, right? There's this whole, especially in post, it was like, oh, well, you have to get an internship and like not make any money. It's getting a little better. In the sense that now there are training programs that give you a stipend. So you can, like the Post New York Alliance has a Made in New York post PA training program, which is basically, that's the super entry level program, super entry level role. And this is a training program to get people in the door. Because a lot of times it was like, oh, like there were a bunch of people who all knew somebody in the industry and that's how they got jobs, which on one level, you could say like, oh, well, that's how people get work in the world. But on the other hand, it was like, hey, this is how we get to a place where the industry isn't diverse and we have like, we don't have a lot of varieties of perspective. So there are, searching out some of those training programs and also, it's just watch a bunch of stuff, watch a lot of things. And then like, if you fall in love with the show, then read like the internet, it's amazing. But like read everything you can about the person who made that show. How was it shot? What's the story of its production? Like you will find something in there that you're like, oh, this is part of the story of the show that really, or this movie or whatever, this like YouTube series, whatever, that speaks to you. And then follow that breadcrumb trail, to the next thing. That's all I got.
Well, that's excellent. Vanya, do you have anything to add?
Yes, well, I would say try to, and especially if you're in high school, that's a great position because you are not expected, hopefully, to work and support yourself yet, and then just try to do it. Try to get to the project. Try to, your local film school, offer yourself as a grip or electrician or PA or something, or tell them I'll do whatever you want me to do 2 days a week, and they'll take your offer a lot of times. And just try to, like, whatever short film, whatever student film, try to get involved. And if you can generate your own work, no matter how small it is, once you have something that you're satisfied with, because you'll never be satisfied with anything you do. But once you do something that you are willing to show to people, make a list of people whose work you love and try to. It's easy to actually find their email addresses and write to everybody and try to show them your work. You'd be surprised that big names, amazing people will write you back. But and that worked for me. I had mentors that amazing, incredible people who helped me with letters of recommendations. I met Vilmos Zsigmond and Haskell Wexler in Budapest, right after, when all that was happening that I talked about. Why they decided to help me, I don't know, but they wrote letter of recommendation that got me into NYU, for example. I don't think I'd ever, it's just amazing that I got into that film school, which was then, I don't know what it is now, but it was then one of the top film schools in the world. So people will help you try to find them. And if you're really passionate about it, they'll recognize it.
Yeah, and I have to, right. And I think don't underestimate the power of going through that creative process yourself. And
right.
I should just echo, like, and it's true. You will never feel like it's good enough. You just have to keep making stuff. It's really
Right.
important. Like, don't hide your light. You know.
Right.
Well, thank you both so much. The insights I know personally is amazing to get that from two successful professionals in the field, and I'm sure all of our listeners and viewers on YouTube also feel the same way. I know the Great Neck community does, and Nassau County. So thank you both for coming along. Thank you, Vanya and Claire. Thank you both so much for joining us. Thank you, HBO, for getting us to be in touch with you guys. And thank you, Lilrick, for providing support and the connections for this program that we could host here for Nassau Libraries.
Cool. Thanks. Take
Thank
care.
you. This was fun.
Yeah, it was great.
Thank you, guys.